Alright, for this lesson today we're going to be talking about domain and range. We are going to continue that into the next lesson as well. So when we're talking about domain and range, the domain of a function is all of the x values. So domain are x values, and the range, which is my output, are my y values. So domain is x, range is y. So just to kind of quickly review, we're going to look at a few examples. And in these examples, it says, what is the domain and range? Now, when we list the domain and range, we use our squiggles, so our set brackets, and we're going to list them out from least to greatest. So for the domain, we have 8, we have 4, and we have -5. So I'm going to start with -5. I'm going to list 4, 8, and 8. Okay, and then when we do our range, we're going to list out our y values. So we're going to use our brackets. We're going to do them from least to greatest. So we're going to do -2, 0, 6, and 7. So the question is this set of values, is this relation a function? So the set that I have here, does it have any repeating x values? And this set does not have any repeating x values, so therefore it is not a function. Okay. So then for our next one, again, we're going to list out those values here. So we're going to start with our domain. So we have -1, 5, 2, and 7. We're going to put them in a set from least to greatest. So -1, 2, 5, and 7. And for our range, we're going to do 6. We have 2 6s, a 0, -3. So -3, 0, 6, and 6. And is this a function? Well, I may have some repeating range values, but my domain does not repeat. So this is a function, because I do not have any repeating x values. All right, so when we have a map, remember in the last video, I said when you do mapping, that it's best to make a table. So 0 maps to 3, 0 maps to 2. 2 maps to 2, and 2 maps to 1, and 3 maps to 1. So my domain, again, we're going to list those out. My range is 1, and we have 1 twice. And is this a function? Well, I can clearly see that if I identify, I have repeating zeros and I have repeating 2, so this is not a function. Again, I said in the last video, if I look at my input, if I have 2 arrows going out to the right, then that means that I'm going to have 2 repeating x values, which means it's not a function. Now, the next thing we're going to learn how to do is we're going to learn how to read domain and range on a graph. So when we read domain, okay, this is very important. So when we read domain, we read it from the left to the right. So we see what's going on from left to right. So we just kind of identify what values we have coming from the left side and where are they going to on the right side. We do the same thing with range, except for we go to the bottom to the top. Okay, so if I'm looking, and I'm going to just go ahead and start identifying these pieces here. If I'm looking at this graph, so I have, and I would consider these arrows because the graph is going to keep going. If I'm coming from the right, so I'm coming from -infinity because it's going to keep going. And I'm stopping right here at the x value of 0. Okay, so I'm coming from -infinity and I'm going to the x value of 0. So it's everything that is less than 0. So x is less than or equal to, the reason it's equal to because there's a point there, 0. So my domain is everything less than or equal to 0. Now my range. My range is going to be everything from the bottom to the top. So from the bottom I have an arrow here. So it's going to be coming from negative infinity, and I'm going to keep going up, up, up until I get my other arrow. So it's going up to infinity. So my range is all numbers. So we call that all real numbers, because it goes from negative infinity to positive infinity. It includes all the y values, all the real numbers. All right, so let's try that with the next one. So again, I have some arrows here. So for my domain, okay, so remember domain, we read from left to right. Okay, so left to right. So from the left, I'm coming from this arrow, so negative infinity, so it's coming from the negative direction. And it's going to positive infinity. It's going to keep going to the right. So the domain here is all real numbers. All right, so my range. So remember, my range is bottom to top. Okay, so we're coming from the bottom. So we're coming from negative infinity because it's coming from the bottom part with an arrow, and it's going up to infinity. So the range here is all real numbers. So when I talk about a line includes all x's and all y's. All right, so I'm going to start drawing some guides here. So for this particular problem, I have arrows here. I have an arrow, and it's going to keep going. All my x values from negative infinity to positive infinity. So if it's negative infinity and it keeps going to the right, then my domain here is all real numbers. Now this one is a little bit different for the range, so let's pay very close attention to the range here. So for this particular problem, it's kind of going to keep going up and down and up and down. It never goes lower than this area here, but it never goes higher than this area here. So this one's not going to keep going up, or it's not going to keep going down. It keeps repeating itself. So if this keeps repeating itself, that means that my range is never going to go any lower than -3, but it's never going to go any higher than +3. So it includes everything in between 3 and -3. So x is between -3 and 3 and includes those two values. Now this one right here, if you haven't understood a word I've said this entire video, this one right here is super important. So definitely pay attention here. This right here is a quadratic, and we're going to get to a quadratic eventually. But being able to determine the domain and range for a quadratic is probably the domain and range type question that's going to be asked if we wind up having final exams here. So when I'm looking at my domain, okay, so my domain is from left to right. So a lot of students try to say, oh, it stops here. No, it has an arrow. It's going to keep getting wider and wider and wider. So it's going to keep going out to the left, and it's going to keep going out to the right. So my domain is all real numbers, okay, because it includes all these x values on this number line. I could pick a point and I would get an x value. Now the range. So remember, the range is from the bottom to the top. So this doesn't go any lower than this point here, which is -3. And then it goes up to infinity. So my range is my x values that are greater than or equal to -3. And it'll always happen like that, especially when you have a quadratic. It'll either be that the value is always greater than or equal to something, or is always going to be less than or equal to something. So I'm going to give you an example here. I'm going to go down to this bottom one here. So you see that this one is coming from negative infinity. Okay, so here's my graph. coming from negative infinity, but it stops at -1. So it's everything less than or equal to -1. And you see the difference in the direction of it, that one's going up, so therefore it's everything greater than that. And then the one that we just did was it was going down, so it was everything less than that. But again, my domain is still going to keep going out, okay? So as this goes out, it's going to keep getting wider. So it's all real numbers. All right, and the last one we have. So my domain here is a little bit different because it kind of looks like a quadratic, but it isn't because it's sideways. So I'm going to be looking at my domain from left to right. So from the left, it's coming from -2, and it's going to positive infinity. So my domain this time is all values greater than or equal to, and I just put less than. So greater than or equal to -2, because it includes everything greater than -2. All right, so for my range, my range are my y values. So that is going to be coming from the bottom. So it's going to keep going down, so negative infinity. And then it's going to keep going up to positive infinity. So the range this time is all real numbers. Now, this is probably the first time that you've ever really talked about domain and range in a graphical sense. So just remember, domain you read from left to right. It's your x values. Range you read from bottom to top, and it's your y values. Please, 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 if you have more questions about this, if you get to a problem you don't understand, don't hesitate to send us an email, contact us any way you can so that we can answer your questions about this.